Let's talk about Israel and Gaza. We've had Penny Wong wandering around, Anthony Albanese. They're all busily attacking Israel, as is their preference. Let's go to speak to someone who actually knows what is going on in Israel, someone who has experience there on the ground, and that is, of course, Colonel Richard Kemp. Richard, great to see you as always. It will come as no surprise to you that we had Penny Wong, our Labour Foreign Minister, and Anthony Albanese desperately calling for ceasefires, criticising the IDF. Now, yes, of course, it is a tragedy that the 7, including 1 Australian aid workers, were killed. You know from your experience in war this happens. But tell us, what is the danger now for Israel with this kind of constant pressure now for ceasefires and blaming Israel rather than Hamas, who should wear the blame for the tragic deaths of the 7 aid workers? Richard, your thoughts?
Well, we're getting the same noises over here, Rowan, in London about things like arms embargoes and trying to force Israel to stop fighting. This is beginning to take shape over here, particularly after this tragic incident. But the effect really is going to be minimal in relation to Israel directly, unless the United States really turns on Israel and ceases to supply Israel with not only arms and ammunition, but also the political support that it needs. And the effect that has, okay, it will have an effect on Israel. Israel will still be able to fight if it chooses to defy the US. But the effect all of this noise has, coming from Australia, from the UK, from the US and other countries, is to strengthen Hamas. It gives encouragement. Hamas is on its last legs in some respects, and it certainly will be once the IDF go into Rafah in the south. But meanwhile, they're getting courage. They're getting, effectively, they are being encouraged by these people in our countries to fight on and fight harder. And even Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, which is the terrorist organization that threatens Israel from Lebanon, he said today, I think it was, that he's optimistic this war is going to end soon in Gaza because of all the international pressure. This is the kind of empowerment that these uninformed noises give to Israel's enemies.
James. Colonel Kemp, I want to ask you, though, about what I believe is the real root of this issue here, which is Iran. And it seems to me that the Biden administration in particular is playing a very two-faced game here, where they're acting still supportive of Israel, still supplying arms to Israel, although that support is being progressively withdrawn, while at the same time doing absolutely nothing about stopping Iran supplying arms to Hezbollah, giving aid to Hamas, and, allowing it to become the regional hegemon, potentially a nuclear-armed one. How is the Biden administration getting away with this double game?
Well, this is the problem. Biden's administration is fixed on the idea still, even after what happened on the 7th of October by one of Iran's major proxies, the Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, of course, in Gaza, still fixed on the idea of appeasing Iran, of trying to normalize relationships in the region, of trying to get a renewed nuclear deal through. Even now, they're still thinking about this. And the consequences, of course, are that Iran will become more aggressive, not only towards Israel, but to the West as well. In Australia, in Britain, in other European countries, in the US, Iran has sleeper cells, IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and Hezbollah sleeper cells, which are ready to attack us. And this sort of encourages that country in its actions. And I mentioned Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah up in the north. They're waiting to attack Israel. They're waiting for the words from Tehran to do it. And by emboldening Iran, that's much more likely to happen. The best way of deterring Iran and deterring Hezbollah is for the world, particularly the US, to give absolute support to Israel to destroy Hamas. And that will send a very, very salutary lesson to both Iran, Hezbollah, and the other proxies in the region.
Rita.
I want to get your response to something our former Foreign Minister Bob Carr said about this tragedy with the aid workers. And I'll just read you what he posted. He said, Israel now adding to its war crimes the assassination of aid workers deliberately, I believe, to worsen food deprivation in Gaza. This suggestion, and I would hope that it's not a widely held one amongst politicians, former or current, that this was somehow deliberate. I mean, just how absurd is that they would deliberately target aid workers to try to starve the Palestinian population?
It's obviously unspeakable nonsense. And we've heard, again, similar noises over here and elsewhere around the world on this. Why would Israel do that? I mean, first of all, if you set aside the laws of war, which Israel scrupulously adheres to, and morality, if you set those aside, what would be the actual purpose of deliberately killing aid workers? It would make no sense at all. Meanwhile, Israel is doing everything it can, everything in its power to allow aid to get into Gaza. And in fact, in the last 6 months since this war began, Israel has permitted aid into Gaza, which is about twice as much as it requires. It's allowed about a year's supply of humanitarian aid into Gaza in 6 months, a year's supply. So, of course, it's nonsense. Israel wouldn't do that. Why would it? And the very idea that a tragic accident like this can be then used against Israel. Israel has admitted it was wrong. It's disciplined some of the people involved in it. It's unfortunately, it's the kind of tragedy that you get in war. I've known many cases like this. And in fact, President Biden, who was outraged by it, in his words, was the president when a similar attack took place against an aid worker and 9 members of his family in Afghanistan in 2021, yes, when a US drone strike hit them thinking they were terrorists. This is horrible, but it happens.
And several children in that particular incident were killed as well as the aid workers. What about this proposal that Israel has to get rid of UNRWA, which Australia's again restored funding to, and to have a body that's not connected to Hamas to do the humanitarian aid? Is that something that is likely to be supported by the international community?
I very much doubt that. I think it's something that's essential. UNRWA is effectively an extension of Hamas. UNRWA is part of the Hamas machinery. UNRWA terrorists took part in the 7th of October massacre. UNRWA delivers aid to their Hamas terrorist masters. Whether they have a choice in that or not, I don't know. But it does need to go. It needs to be replaced by something, whether it be the UN High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, which looks after refugees everywhere else, whether it's some other UN body or indeed outsourcing it to a commercial organisation. I don't know, but it does need to change. Whether that's likely to happen in the near future, I don't know. But I very much doubt. I suspect there'll be a lot of criticism of Israel for trying to do that, as we've already seen.
Richard, just quickly before we go, in your opinion, how quickly could the Israelis, if the West would get off their back and just let them do the job, finish off Hamas? How important is that they do that, get into those tunnels, free the hostages, finish this thing? What reasonably do you foresee happening in the next couple of months?
I think it very much depends on when Israel decides to launch its operation into Rafah. They're still fighting elsewhere in Gaza, but Rafah is the last major stronghold of Hamas. And Israel hasn't yet begun seriously attacking Rafah. And it's obviously there's pressure from the international community to try and stop it. I think one of the factors involved there is what happens up in the north. Of course, Israel can fight a war against Hezbollah and against Hamas at the same time, but it would not be optimum. And so I think Israel is probably looking to see what's emerging in the north before it commits major forces, which we needed to Rafah. It's got 3 divisions up on the border with Lebanon now, and that's obviously in anticipation of a need to get in on the ground in Lebanon and deal with Hezbollah. The sequencing of that is obviously a military decision that can only be known or understood properly by the IDF and by the government in Israel.
Colonel Richard Kemp, always great to chat to you. Thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Common sense there from Colonel Richard Kemp. I'll just point out, of course, that not everybody in UNRWA was involved in October 7th. Certain individuals were, and that is much reason for us to be not financing them, in my opinion, with Australian taxpayers' dollars, which we have been doing thanks to Penny Wong and the Teals.